It's crazy to think that the summer is already coming to a close. With 2020 being as crazy as it was, it doesn't even really feel like we had a summer. Nonetheless, park rangers have still been experiencing some of the creepiest things you can imagine, even during the quarantine. As always, if you have a story you would like to share in a future video, whether it be a park ranger story or something completely different, be sure to submit that story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going. Now, without further hesitation, let us get into these absolutely terrifying park ranger stories. My name is Jim. Most just call me Jimbo. I live in Pennsylvania. I am retired now, but I used to be a park ranger in the 80s and the 90s. My favorite part of my job was simply observing the natural beauty of our state. A big chunk of my time was spent simply surveying the wilderness and watching nature while I patrolled the parks I worked at. On one such patrol in September of 1992, I came upon a tree with some deep markings. I would have thought it was a bear or something like that, but the marks were just so far spread apart. They were deep claw marks from a 5-fingered animal, or thing of some kind, that burrowed near halfway through the tree itself. This was strange, but it wasn't something I was thinking too hard on at the time. No, instead I continued my scenic tour through our beautiful countryside. In case you can't tell, I love nature. It's beautiful. Even in my retirement, I still go out and walk the parks and just take in the beauty of our lovely country. The farther away from people, the better in my opinion. I say this as nature has a natural beauty in my opinion. It's one that simply isn't inherent in big cities with lots of noise. I'm getting off track though. I continued for the rest of my day thinking nothing much of the markings I had found. By the next morning, I was rearing and ready to go up and go to work. When I stepped outside my home though, I found something strange on my property. To help you understand just a bit better, I live in the country, partly why I mentioned my disdain for cities earlier. I have a decently sized property. Anyway, I stepped outside and found some sort of mark on a tree near my home. It was just as deep, and it made me do a double take around the property in my area. I found no strange signs or weird marks. It was just on that tree. Part of me wondered if something had followed me home. But then again, I'd seen nothing but claw marks, and I was never one to let my imagination get the best of me. As such, I drove to work and once again forgot all about the markings. Upon arriving at work, I found sheriff cars roaming the park. I asked if I could help the lawmen, at which point they asked if I was in charge. I nodded and mentioned I was, just about to start my shift, and was asking what was wrong. It was then that I was told some very disturbing news. Someone who had been camping in the area was on their way out, and they found a dog torn to shreds. I asked if they could show me. I have always had a strong stomach, and they brought me over to a very horrible sight. A dog had its insides torn out and looked completely mutilated. It had several claw marks that seemed to run through its entire body, and much of the body was in pieces. It was such a terrible thing to see, to say the least. Law enforcement then asked if I had seen anything strange around the parks as of late. I mentioned the claw marks I had seen the other day, but I also said I had seen nothing more. They told me to keep an eye out as they believed some kind of wild animal was out there, and they were worried it could pose a threat to the public. I also got a number to call in the event that I saw anything else or found anything in the same manner as this poor dead dog. I told them I'd keep the number and I'd keep an eye out and move on to my morning duties. There was a strange air about this day. It was like any other shift, but something felt off. I'm not saying it's because of the way my day started, but the day just as a whole felt wrong. The best way I could describe it is there was a sense of foreboding in the air. About 3/4 of the way through my shift that day, I decided to go back to the area because I had a little bit of spare time. I saw those claw marks. I made my way back to the tree and looked around. I didn't find anything strange outside of the claw marks. I didn't notice any sort of footprints or paw prints or tracks. There was a bit of heaviness in the air, but I just chalked that up to the strange day I had. The remainder of my shift was quiet, and I quickly headed home once I ended work. I still remember the meal that night. A huge pot of lima beans and rice with some nice deer sausage. I went to bed that night very content with a nice full belly. Sleep is rarely as great as when you fall into a food coma. At least, in most instances. This night was not one of those instances. I crashed quickly, but I was awoken by a loud banging at my door. I got up, grabbed my shotgun, and approached the door. By the time I'd reached the door, it was practically falling off its hinges. I had really had no time to process what was happening, and I was still half asleep, but I realized one thing. It wasn't good. I raised my shotgun without much of a thought and fired around through the door. The way I figured, it was someone trying to knock in my door, probably to rob me or something like that, and that meant they were on my land and had no right to be there, and every right to be shot. I live on private property, and I can assure you that you can't miss the many signs that read trespassers will be shot on sight. Upon this point, though, I'd never really met anyone stupid enough to test that. Now I figured, having blown a hole through what was left of my door, that someone was probably on the other side in pain and potentially bleeding out. The first thing I did was call the police. The next thing I did was try to open my door, but it was half beaten in and a bit warped. When I went to open it, the thing practically fell off. I was in shock because I thought whoever did that must have been quite strong. I saw the deep marks in the door. It was the same claw marks, and I went white with fear. I jumped back from my door and held my shotgun at it. I then waited for the police. They said it must have been a bear attack or something. I explained to them I had seen a lot of things in my lifetime, but bears don't leave marks like this. Still, I couldn't rule out it was some kind of an animal, so after filing a report with the police, I spent the rest of the night with my gun at my side while sitting in my rocking chair in front of the door. I didn't sleep a wink that remainder of the night. I can't say what time I was awoken, but I was shocked awake, and the trauma from it all began. If you've ever been traumatized, you'll understand what I mean. If not, just know it can screw with your head. When morning came, I called in for the day from work, got a new door, reinforced everything, and then spent the rest of the day snoring after eating a quick meal. When I woke up again, it was nighttime. I knew at this point I needed to try to sleep, or my sleep pattern would be screwed, and so I attempted to, but when I would be brought back to the night before, and I'd be hearing loud bangings and shots. It was then I'd find that nothing was there, and nothing went on. When I finally fell asleep, I was awoken the next morning to knocking at my door. It was one of my buddies and neighbors from several miles away who'd come to visit. I explained to him everything that had happened, and he brought up a story about something on his own land that had been eating his pigs. He was a farmer, and how one night he found himself firing at it. He said he wasn't sure if he had ever hit it, but the shadow of the thing must have been at least 12 feet tall. He hadn't seen it since, but a few others around town had heard some strange things, or had some odd run-ins with this creature. The town was pretty small at the time. It was a subject you simply didn't bring up. After my visit with my buddy, I tried to situate myself into a normal wake-sleep cycle again by spending the rest of my day attempting to relax with some reading and a bit of television. Day went by fine. I fell asleep relatively easily that night, probably from pure exhaustion. It took no time at all for me to wake to the sound of scratching on my walls. I listened more closely and I could swear something was slowly dragging its claws along the side of my house, and at times seeming to try to quickly scratch the walls. It was strange, but I got my shotgun and went to look around my windows. This didn't go well, however, as the moment I went peeking around, this thing appeared quickly in front of my window. Its face was just about the size of my window, and it snapped at me. When it did, it shattered my window and began to try to come into my home. I remember firing several shells into it and running upstairs to my bedroom, where I locked myself inside, called the police again, and reloaded my shotgun, ready for one hell of a fight. I was freaking out as I had heard this thing running through my place and trashing things. I heard it sniffing around, and once it hit the stairs, I swear I heard it leap over them in one bound. As if that wasn't scary enough, I could hear this thing smashing doors down all the while I waited in a corner, begging dispatch to hurry the hell up. Things got quiet before the sudden smashing of my bedroom door, which felt like it was a toothpick. This thing came in, and through the moonlight I could make out its massive size and some of its features. It looked like a dog or a wolf on two legs. It was at least 12 to 13 feet tall, and that was hunched over. It had these huge claws. Its teeth looked damn near the size of my forearm, and I remember shaking violently. I felt faint and terrified for my life. I huddled in a corner as this thing came closer. Then I heard a sound I will never forget. Sirens. They were loud and this creature turned for a moment, distracted by the sounds. I remember firing a couple of shots and trying to run. This creature took a swipe at me and missed, but charged me right after. I was hit with a heavy force and lifted from my feet and through my window. Now, the second story isn't terribly high up, but it definitely hurt when I landed. I remember rolling and the sound of my gun going off as it hit the ground next to me. The police rolled up and someone checked on me as I pointed toward the bedroom. When I heard a loud stomping and another window breaking, the last thing I remember was my shaking. I had peed myself as well, but you would have too if you lived through that. I kept repeating, "It's not a bear. It's not a bear. It's not a bear," over and over again. I wanted to stop saying it, but I just couldn't. I think I was in a mild shock. I stayed with family a few times over for a couple of weeks. Now I used paid sick time during this time and reevaluated my living situation. I ultimately decided to stay put. I wound up rigging up my home with every possible security measure I could afford at the time. I've never seen this thing again though. I'm not sure if it was the couple of weeks I took away, or the police ambush, or what stopped it from coming back. Maybe it simply moved on. Maybe I just got lucky. I'll never forget my experiences, so long as I live. My name is Kenneth, and back in 2012, in Utah, I had an odd experience while at work. I'm a park ranger. I was 32 at the time and really just getting away from my partying days. I loved my job and drinking, but after 30, it really begins to take its toll on you, so I had recently decided I was going to cut back on it immensely. I say this so you know, I wasn't drinking. Not that I would on the job anyway, but you feel me. I was in no way doing anything that would hinder my ability to perceive things around me or any of that. Long story short, I wasn't tripping when this happened. Anyway, it was just before lunch and I was patrolling the park and thinking about what I was going to do that weekend. I was excited because it had been a long weekend and I was pretty exhausted. We'd had a few run-ins with some less than cooperative homeless people the day before, and much of my work week had been spent doing some digging and some planting for a project we were assisting that involved the community. So, there I was, just walking and thinking, when I hear the strangest call. I'm still not even sure how to describe it, other than it sounded like something was calling out. Even that doesn't do the sound justice. Well, this caught my attention, so I went toward the sound. Everything grew quiet, and I was just about to let the whole thing go and turn back. I was hungry and it was almost lunchtime, when I heard it again, a little deeper into the woods. So, I decided I'm going to check into things and just go a little bit further into the woods. I walk a ways and then I see something, and at first I mistook it for a tree, but then it moved. Now, I did a double take before focusing. I tried to keep as quiet as I could, as I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I didn't want to put myself in any danger or shock whatever this thing was. that's when I heard that call again. It was loud and clearly coming from this tall creature. I got a bit closer and stopped as I wasn't comfortable moving any closer than I had gotten up to that point. I stared at this thing, and it began to move. It was then I realized it had very dark hair all over its body. From afar, I believe I had mistaken it for a tree, because it was so still, and the color of it was perfect to blend in with the trees around it. As the thing begins to walk away, I tried to get a picture, but I wanted its face, and for it to stay still long enough for me to take a picture. I shouted, "Hey!" and this thing turned. I lifted my phone up, and then just like that, it was gone. I don't know how to put this, but the speed of this creature was nothing I had ever seen. This was made stranger because it was so big. I looked around the area and couldn't find much. I believe it was a Bigfoot though. The size and the features seemed to line up. Now I figured this would be the extent of things and headed back to the station to get my lunch. I ate quietly. I kept to myself as I wasn't going to bring up Bigfoot to my colleagues, being I didn't get a picture of the creature. Still, some of my coworkers, Larry mostly, noticed I wasn't as talkative and asked if I was alright. I told him I was fine and just tired and ready for the weekend. My coworker left things at that, and after lunch I went back out to the area I was in before to see if I could find any footprints or anything. But it was fall, and there were a ton of leaves, so sadly I never found anything. All that aside though, I did hear that calling again. It was deeper into the woods, mind you, but it was definitely still out there. That was strange, I thought to myself, but before I knew it, I went to investigate again. I just couldn't help it. I was pretty curious, and also some part of me really wanted proof of what I had seen, if for no other reason than to confirm to my own brain that I wasn't insane. So I looked around and headed deeper within. I wanted a good shot if I got one at all. I didn't want a picture of something tall in the woods because I'm not joking when I say, this thing from afar looked like it could just be another tree. So I pursued trying to get a closer shot, and eventually I caught up to where the calling was coming from. I heard the calling. I heard it clear as day. The problem was I couldn't see anything this time. It was like whatever I was looking for was invisible. I know how that sounds, but I swear to you, something was calling from a few feet in front of me, and I could not see it. I remember how tall this thing was, and it seemed perplexing to me that something this tall could just vanish. The thought occurred to me that it might be camouflaging itself somehow. But the thing is, that wouldn't make it completely invisible, right? Being unable to see anything, I started to look for unlikely things. For example, I started looking up in the trees, even though I knew, with the size of this thing, there was no way it was in the treetops. I looked high, and I looked low, and after a while, I stopped. I remember being pissed at myself because I felt like I had a chance to get undeniable proof for myself and potentially the world of Bigfoot's existence. I'm talking non-grainy, actual legit photographs, but no, I missed my chance. Perhaps I should have just taken a picture or taken a video immediately, but from afar, as I said, this thing blended into the trees, and even once I looked close enough, my mind was still trying to process what I was seeing. As I walked back, I heard the calling one more time, and I looked back, and that's when I saw this thing one last time. It stared at me for maybe a second or two, and then bolted off into the woods. It wasn't long enough for me to get my phone in position, and I kick myself to this day because in my mind, I could have definitely gotten proof. But retelling this tale, I know how it's going to sound. Still, I thought I'd share my experiences anyway. I hope if you read this, it will find well enough use. You may call me Lillian. I'm a park ranger out in Louisiana. I don't know how to set this up to begin to explain my experiences, but I'll just jump into it and let anyone who may hear this make their own judgments. My story begins on a crisp October morning in 2009, with a dog I'd found in my park. Now, this dog was motionless and I was worried about it, so I quickly jumped in to check its breathing. It didn't appear to be breathing. I was going to radio my supervisor about the dead dog I had found when I was suddenly blinded by a light from the sky. I couldn't move, and seconds later it was gone. I was able to move, and the dog had vanished. I tripped out, but what tripped me out more was when I checked my watch and realized it hadn't been seconds. I'd lost 2 hours. It was about lunch, so I headed back to the station and talked to my supervisor, who asked where I'd been. I told them I was patrolling the area and found an abandoned homeless camp and was cleaning up. They didn't really argue with me about this, and I went about the rest of my day fairly well. I was silently in shock still about my entire situation, but I tried to brush it off and finish my day, which for the most part went off without an incident. That night when I went home, I took a shower and then ate before crashing. That's when I had a dream, but I'm not entirely sure if it was a dream. I was on a table in this sleek-looking office. Everything seemed very sterile. I mean, this is how clean it looked. I was naked and cold. I remember a man, or what I thought was a man, walking in at the time. He stood over me and explained in a very calm voice that everything was going to be fine. He said they just needed some samples, and then I'd be placed comfortably back in my bed. Now, the man looked like an older man, but this changed over time. He injected me with something in the neck, and I began to hallucinate for a few seconds. I saw this man's face morph into an old man's face to a gray, humanoid, with big black eyes, and then back to an old man's face. I began to freak out, but then he spoke again and asked me to remain calm and that they were simply studying my DNA. He laughed and said if I had seen his true form he apologized, and that he assured me he meant me no harm. He said I should be proud that I'd be helping advance science with more studies on my people and the wildlife on Earth. I am not crazy. This is definitely what was said to me. He smiled once again, and at that moment, everything was done, if that makes sense. I felt an immense calm. The last thing I remember was a barking, and the calm voice saying it's okay, we've revived you. Then I passed out again. When I woke the next morning, I felt extremely relaxed. This isn't the strangest part of any of this, though. The strangest thing was I heard a scratching at my door. I got up and put a robe on before heading to the door. When I opened it, I fell over almost in shock. Standing before me, now barking, was a very happy dog. It wasn't just any dog, though. I can promise you. It was the dead dog I found the day before. The one that vanished in front of my very eyes. Now, if that wasn't strange enough, this certainly will be. I felt around on the back of my neck because seeing the dog made me remember the injection, and sure enough I found a small puncture spot. At least I could feel it, on the back of my neck. A little freaked out, I called in sick to work and made an appointment with my doctor. I didn't say exactly what was up, only that I wanted to get something on my neck looked at. I should also mention I did take the dog, and I named him Maximus. I still have him to this day, too. Anyway, I eventually went to my appointment later that week and had myself checked out. Anything that could be checked out, that I could afford to get checked out, I got checked out. My doctor ultimately never found anything strange in any test results or anything like that. You can call me Jay. I'm a female working for the Park Services out of Montana. I'm going to get to the point and say I saw something I can't explain while working. I know, pretty normal so far, right? The first time I met Anna was my first day on the job. I was having lunch and she walked right up to me and told me about her day and her granddaughters, and she just was the most wholesome human I had ever had the pleasure of meeting, and probably will ever meet in my life. I've been working for 10 years with Park Services, and every day since Anna has always joined me for lunch and brought cookies and just been the sweetest old lady you could ever know. It was 4 years ago when I had a day I still don't know how to explain. It started off nicely. I woke up amped up on coffee and excited to take on my day. It was a Friday, so I also had the excitement for the weekend motivating me. Anyway, I went through my day looking forward to lunch with Anna. At around lunch, I went to the usual bench I'd sit to meet Anna, and sure enough, she'd show up right at 12 on the dot. We sat and ate and smiled and laughed. She told me stories about her mother from when she was a child, and she asked me about my dating life. I laughed and told her it was non-existent. This was about 12:15. I remember this because she laughed and told me I was beautiful and I would find someone when the time was right. She started to say I was young, but halfway through young, she suddenly seized up and started to struggle, like she was having trouble breathing. I grabbed my coat, laid her down, and called 911. I kept trying to reassure her everything was going to be okay, but I felt myself crying at the same time because I am so sure that I wasn't very convincing. Another thing that threw me off was that Anna was smiling. She seemed unable to breathe, but she was smiling. Shortly after, I heard a voice say she was going to be fine. It was a voice that was very distinct and very assured, but when I looked around, I saw no one there. I stayed with Anna until the paramedics arrived. As soon as work was out, I prepared my stuff and headed for the hospital. I tried to get in, but they weren't going to let me in initially as I technically wasn't family. They reassured me she had lived, and after talking to her, they finally allowed me in back after she said I was the only living family she had left. I remember feeling a welling of relief on the inside and also happiness, and I found myself crying again out of joy that my good friend was still on this earth. In many ways, I considered Anna like a grandmother to me. I went to her room and talked to her, and upon entering the room I was greeted with all too warm familiar smile. She laughed and said she'd be fine. Her first words to me were, "Jay, my dear, I tried to tell you I'd be fine, but I couldn't breathe." This was followed by laughter on her part, and I laughed too, but mostly out of the fact her laugh was so infectious. I didn't really find it funny, but I just was so happy at that moment. It turned out that she had a heart attack. The thing was, due to where it was, she should have been dead already. The doctors weren't sure how she lived, but I remember that voice that told me she'd be fine. It wasn't Anna's voice. There was no one around us at the time when it happened, and I'm sure I heard that voice. I could still hear those words in my head today echoing. I remember leaving Anna that evening with a smile, knowing she was okay. As I looked back inside the room through the window and the door, I saw someone there, standing next to her smiling. They looked at me, smiled, and faded before my eyes. I don't know how to explain any of this really. I'm not sure if what I saw was an angel or what, but I'm grateful my friend is still alive today, and I can't shake this feeling that whatever was in the room with her is the reason. I still have lunch with Anna today. I'm grateful for every second on this earth that I have with her. My name is T. Well, my real name is Tad, but I've never liked the name, so I just go by T. I work for the park rangers in Arizona. My story is really short and sweet. I followed a dog out into the desert. This dog looked hurt. It hobbled on 3 paws and kept running away when I tried to get to it. Being the animal-loving and worried soul I was, I went back to the station and got a truck. I didn't want to be stuck out in the desert without a vehicle, water, and food, and anything I'd need in case I got stranded somehow. I also let my supervisor know where I was headed and why. He wanted to come along as well, and so I allowed it. I think part of it may have been boredom and part of me obviously wanting to have somebody for safety reasons. Well, we drove out quite a ways, GPS and all in hand. We were incredibly safe about everything. So no, this isn't a story about getting stranded out in the middle of the desert or anything like that. No, this is about this dog. After quite a bit of driving, I found it again. I thought it should be easier to keep up with now that I have a truck. It was on the edge of a dune, and so we continued to give it chase. When we crested the dune, we found the dog had already made its way quite a ways ahead of us, and so we continued following this dog. Now, when we finally got close to it, we were getting ready to get out of the truck and help the dog, but it barked at us and hobbled forward. I was confused. I decided we should follow it for a little while longer. We followed this dog for another 20 minutes or so until we finally crested a hill and looked down below to find a truck that had steam pouring out of the front and a man passed out in the sun. We immediately got down and helped the guy. The dog was licking the man. He was barely conscious, and we tried to get him a few sips of water. We then called 911, and someone got there pretty quickly. When they arrived, they rushed the man to the hospital, and over the course of a few weeks they were able to nurse him back to full health. We talked to the man, and I remember him thanking us profusely for saving his life. I remember asking the man what his dog's name was, and he said it was Teddy. I told him to thank Teddy as he was the one who got us our attention and led to him. The man's name was David, and we still keep in touch today. Always love your four-legged friends. You never know when they'll show their love for you by saving your life. I know this isn't the longest story, but I thought it was a sweet experience, and it isn't every day you run into a dog that leads you to a rescue mission. Park rangers see some crazy stuff. As always, I don't think that's ever gonna change. This series is truly probably the strangest one on the channel. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to hit that like button as it really does help me out a ton. If you're new here, why not join us? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video. I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you yourself have a story that you would like to share in the swamp, be sure to send that in at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going. I'd love to know down in the comments below which story was your favorite tonight. I think that last one might be mine. I love a good dog story, especially when the dog doesn't die. If you're not aware, you can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and just about everywhere else you find podcasts online. If you guys are looking for a mask to wear while COVID is running rampant, you can get a Swamp Dweller mask at Teespring. You can find the link to my merch store in the description down below. I'd love to see you guys wearing some cool masks out there. Thank you guys as always for supporting the swamp the way you do. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.